Welcome to Singapore Property Talk Law, the show where we like to really get into the details of Singapore real estate. And I'm Damien. I'll be guiding you through this deep dive.
And I'm Serene, here to break it all down.
So today we're talking about something that's been making headlines recently and causing a bit of a stir. It's this thing called the 99-to-1 scheme.
Yeah, you might have seen those headlines about IRAs, crackdowns, and, people getting into some serious trouble.
Big penalties, too.
Exactly. It can all seem pretty overwhelming.
Definitely. So we're going to try to unpack it all for you today, like what it actually is, what makes it so controversial, and the biggest thing, what you need to know to avoid any of those pitfalls.
Yeah, because honestly, the root of it all is the additional buyer's stamp duty, or ABSD, which, as you probably know, can add a huge chunk of change to the cost of buying a property in Singapore, especially if you're not a first-timer.
Right. So people are always looking for ways to, maybe soften that blow a bit.
Of course, who wouldn't? And that's where this 99-to-1 idea comes in.
Okay, so in the Dr. Wolf article, they use this example of a father and child. So the child, let's say they're a first-time buyer. They go ahead and purchase a property. No ABSD for them yet.
Then they quickly transfer just a tiny 1% share over to the dad who, let's say, already owns another property. The idea being that the father only ends up paying ABSD on that little 1% sliver instead of the full value of the property. Pretty clever, right?
It does sound clever on the surface.
But here's the catch. The IRAS is really clamping down on these arrangements these days.
Yeah, there was that case in the Straits Times that really caught my eye. This mother and son who actually ended up in jail because of this scheme.
Oh, yeah, that was a wild one.
They got caught because their story just didn't hold up.
Yeah.
They claimed the son was buying the property all on his own, but when the IRAS investigated, they found out that the mom's income was absolutely crucial to getting that loan approved right from the get-go.
So basically, they were trying to pull a fast one.
And it seems like the IRAS is not playing around. The Straits Times mentioned that they've recovered over $60 million from these kinds of cases.
Wow.
That's a serious message.
It definitely is. They see this as straight-up tax avoidance, and they're determined to put a stop to it.
So the big question then, is it always illegal? Is there ever a situation where this kind of setup is actually okay?
Well, the Dr. Wealth article does talk about decoupling, which can be a legitimate strategy, especially for couples who are, trying to plan their property journey strategically.
Right, decoupling. So that sounds familiar.
It's often used when one spouse earns significantly more than the other, so they might buy a property with the lower earning spouse holding the majority share. That way, later on, they can buy a second property without getting hit with a huge ABSD bill.
So that makes sense. It sounds pretty reasonable.
It does, but the thing is, the IRS is always looking at the intent behind these arrangements.
The intent.
Exactly. If they think that the main goal from the very beginning was to dodge that ABSD, then even decoupling could land you in hot water.
So even though it can be legit, there's this kind of gray area, and it really comes down to what you were planning to do all along.
Right, and that's why it's so important to talk to the experts and not just rely on what you hear from friends or, what worked for someone else, because what seems like a clever trick could actually backfire big time.
Yeah, and that's what happened to that businessman in the Singapore Law Watch article. Remember, he actually sued his agent and his law firm for over $1 million because they told him this 99-to-1 thing was perfectly fine.
Oh, yeah, I remember that case.
And it turns out it wasn't.
It definitely wasn't. He ended up facing all sorts of penalties and legal headaches, which just goes to show that even professionals can get it wrong sometimes.
It's a reminder that just because someone tells you something is okay doesn't mean it actually is. You need to do your own research, get second opinions, really understand what you're getting into.
Absolutely. This isn't about finding loopholes or cutting corners. It's about making smart choices that are good for you financially and that also, stay on the right side of the law.
Buying property in Singapore is a huge decision, and it's crucial to do it the right way, carefully and responsibly.
Couldn't agree more. And it really goes to show just how complex these rules are. Constantly evolving, open to interpretation. What might have been fine a few years ago could be a whole different story today.
Totally. So let's switch gears for a sec. The Dr. Wealth article also talks about some safer, more straightforward ways to buy property without, wading into all this murky territory.
Right. They mentioned the sell one buy two approach, which is super popular with couples moving from HDB to private property.
Sell one, buy two.
Yeah, basically you sell your HDB first, and then each spouse can buy a property in their own name, which essentially resets their first-time buyer status for ABSD purposes.
Ah, so you kind of get a clean slate.
Exactly, simple and effective.
They also talked about buying under a trust. But it sounds like with those recent changes to ABSD rates, it's not as attractive an option anymore because of that 35% charge on transfers.
Yeah, that pretty much makes it a non-starter for most people.
Another reminder that things are always changing. Got to stay on top of it.
Definitely. So speaking of changes with the IRS cracking down on these 99 to 1 schemes, it makes you wonder what kind of impact this could have on the market as a whole.
Yeah, the Straits Times had an opinion piece saying this might actually push the government to rethink those stamp duty rules altogether.
That's a real possibility. When something becomes so widespread that the authorities have to step in like this, it often leads to some kind of policy shift.
Right, makes sense. But zooming out a bit, this whole situation also raises some questions about fairness in the market.
Oh, absolutely. Some people argue that these schemes, even if they're technically legal, they give an unfair advantage to certain buyers, which could end up distorting the market.
Right, so let's talk about red flags.
Yeah.
What are some things that might make the IRA suspicious about someone's intentions with a 99 to 1 arrangement?
Well, based on the cases we've seen, a huge red flag is when the 99% shareholder wouldn't actually qualify for a loan on their own without the 1% shareholder acting as a guarantor.
Ah, so it makes it look like the whole thing was just a way to get around the rules.
Exactly. It suggests that the arrangement wasn't really driven by genuine financial need, but more by a desire to avoid paying taxes.
So they're looking for inconsistencies, trying to figure out what your true intentions were.
Right. It's like they're piecing together a puzzle to see if the pieces really fit.
And that's where the role of professionals becomes so important. The Straits Times mentioned real estate agents who might be giving bad advice, either accidentally or even on purpose, just to push these schemes through.
Yeah, unfortunately, that does happen sometimes.
It's a reminder that even professionals can get it wrong, or maybe their priorities aren't always aligned with what's best for the client.
And for buyers, it's a reminder to be cautious. Do your own research. Don't just take someone's word for it, even if they seem like they know what they're talking about.
And let's not forget the lawyers involved. Remember that businessman who sued his lawyer for over $1 million?
Oh, yeah. That was a tough lesson learned.
He trusted his lawyer's advice on the 99 to 1 scheme, and it completely backfired.
It highlights the responsibility that everyone has in these transactions. Buyers, sellers, agents, lawyers. Everyone needs to be careful, make sure they're acting ethically, and that everything is done by the book.
Because the stakes are high, you could end up with financial penalties, legal battles, damage to your reputation.
Yeah.
It's just not worth the risk.
Definitely. And for anyone thinking about getting into the Singapore property market, the key takeaway is to tread carefully, do your research, talk to reputable professionals. And remember, when it comes to something as big as property ownership, the safest path is usually the most straightforward one.
You know, it's amazing how something like this 99 to 1 scheme can spark such a big conversation about taxes and fairness in the market and the roles of everyone involved.
It really shows you how everything in the property market is connected. One little change or loophole can have these huge ripple effects.
Right. And with the IRAs taking such a hard line against these arrangements, it makes you wonder what's going to happen in the long run. Like, how will this affect the Singapore property market overall?
Well, if history tells us anything, it's that the government is not afraid to step in when they see a need to, control things or stabilize the market. We've seen all those cooling measures over the years.
Right.
And this crackdown on 99 to 1 schemes, it kind of feels like another sign that they're ready to tweak the rules again to deal with these new trends.
Yeah. The Straits Times opinion piece even suggested that we might see stricter enforcement of the current rules, or maybe even brand new laws specifically targeting these kinds of arrangements.
Exactly. And that could have a big impact on property prices, how many transactions are happening, even just how buyers are feeling about the market.
It feels like we're at a turning point. The outcome of all this could really shape the future of property investment strategies in Singapore.
Absolutely. Anyone who's thinking about getting into the market or making any big property decisions, they really need to pay attention to how things are changing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember about this whole 99 to 1 saga?
I think it's pretty simple. Proceed with caution. Don't fall for shortcuts or promises of easy loopholes. The rules are complicated, they're constantly in flux, and the consequences of messing up can be really serious.
It's like navigating a maze. You really need a good map and a trusted guide to help you find your way.
Exactly. Do your research, talk to professionals you can rely on, and remember when it comes to property ownership, the safest route is usually the one that's, transparent and follows the rules and focuses on long-term value.
Great advice. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the world of 99 to 1 schemes and what they mean for the Singapore property market.
It's been my pleasure. Always happy to share my thoughts and help listeners navigate this crazy world of real estate.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to Singapore Property Talk Law. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and happy investing.